The most dangerous place to stand is not at the edge of chaos. It's in the middle of something you've completely misread, certain that you're managing it, certain that you understand it, certain that the situation is in your hands. Because the edge of chaos at least knows it's the edge. The middle of a misread situation feels like solid ground. I thought I had control. For almost 2 years, I thought I had control. And the thing that makes this particular story hard to tell is that from the outside, from the version anyone else could see, it probably looked like I did. I was functional. I was high-performing. I was making decisions and executing them and moving through my days with what appeared to be agency. What I actually had was a very convincing performance of control, built over a foundation that had been quietly hollowing out for longer than I realized. My name is not important. What matters is the shape of the thing. I was managing a team of 12 people at a consultancy I'd been with for 6 years. I was good at the job, not average good, genuinely good. I had a reputation for being the person who could walk into a disorganized situation and bring order to it. That reputation was real. I had earned it. And then I had started to believe it in a way that stopped serving me. The belief that you can manage anything is useful up to a point. Past that point, it becomes a story you tell yourself that prevents you from accurately reading when a situation has exceeded your capacity. The project that undid me was a major client expansion, a scope that was larger than anything we'd handled, with a timeline that was aggressive and a client who changed requirements frequently. These are manageable problems, individually. Put together with a team that was understaffed for the scope and a manager who refused to tell her director that she was underwater, they became something else. I knew we were understaffed from week 2. I did not say so. I told myself I would figure it out. I redistributed work. I worked longer hours personally. I micromanaged in ways I usually don't, because I had a subliminal understanding that the project was fragile and a conscious refusal to name that fragility. I was holding the whole thing together by sheer force of attention, and I was calling it management. What I was actually doing was substituting personal effort for structural honesty. There's a difference between those two things, and it matters enormously. Structural honesty would have meant going to my director in week 3 and saying, "The scope is larger than our current team can handle. We need resources, or a timeline adjustment, or a scope reduction." Any one of those 3 things would have been manageable. Personal effort means you absorb the gap yourself, and absorbing the gap means you quietly take on more and more until you are the single point of failure in a system that looks fine from the outside. By month 4, I was sleeping 5 hours a night. I was working weekends without telling anyone because I was aware, on some level, that if I said out loud how many hours I was actually working, someone would ask why, and the answer would reveal that the project was not as under control as I'd been presenting it. My team felt it too. Not the specifics, they didn't know the structural problem I was hiding, but the texture of working under someone who is managing from scarcity rather than from strength. I was less patient. I was more reactive. I was setting up systems at 10 p.m. and communicating about them at 6 a.m., and the team was adjusting to my rhythms because they had to, and I was telling myself that was fine leadership. The client started asking for status meetings more frequently. That's a signal. When a client starts requiring more face time, it usually means something in their confidence is shifting. I read it as their own anxiety about the project timeline. I managed their anxiety. I gave them detailed updates that emphasized progress and minimized the backlog. I was good at that conversation. Too good. Month 6, a missed deliverable. Not catastrophic, not the kind of thing that blows a contract. But specific enough that the client escalated internally, and their escalation triggered an internal review on our side, and the review turned the light on the project that I had been carefully preventing from being turned on. My director sat across from me and asked how the project was actually going. Not the formal version. Actually. I sat there for a moment, and in that moment I felt the specific physical sensation of a structure that has been held up by one person releasing. My shoulders dropped. I said, "We're understaffed by 30% for what they're actually asking us to do, and we've been that way since month 2. She asked why I hadn't said anything. I didn't have a clean answer. The honest answer was, because I believed I could manage it. Because my identity was built around being the person who could manage it. Because saying I couldn't handle it felt, on some level, like losing something essential about who I was. She was kind about it. More kind than I deserved, probably. We put together a resource plan. We had a direct conversation with the client that I'd been avoiding for 4 months. The project survived, not gracefully, but it survived. What I had to work through afterward was more personal. The understanding that what I'd called control was actually a defense mechanism. That my capacity to manage chaos was real, but my belief in that capacity had become so central to my identity that I had stopped accurately assessing when I needed help. I had confused being capable of extraordinary effort with being exempt from structural limits. No one is exempt from structural limits. That's not a weakness. That's just reality. Control, real control, doesn't mean handling everything yourself. It means maintaining honest awareness of what a situation requires and what resources are available to meet those requirements. When those two things don't match, real control means naming the gap and addressing it, not absorbing it personally. What I had was not control. It was endurance dressed up as control. And they feel identical from the inside until the moment they don't. I think about that project manager who sat across from her director and admitted she'd been underwater for 4 months. I think about how much earlier she could have had that conversation. Month 2. Month 1. The week she first looked at the scope and felt the territory slip slightly under her feet. That feeling was information. The right move was to trust it. I know that now. The hard way. But I know it. There is something I want to add that I think is essential to the story, not as a coda, but as the part that actually contains the lesson. Understanding what happened is only half of it. The other half is what you do with the understanding. And for a long time, I confused having insight with having changed. They are not the same thing. You can understand a pattern completely and still enact it perfectly, because patterns live below the level of understanding, in the body and the habit and the reflex. Real change requires not just seeing the pattern but building a different response, not once, but repeatedly, until the new response starts to feel as natural as the old one did. That process is slow. It's humbling. There are weeks where I can track the insight and weeks where I slip back into the old behavior before I've noticed it happening. And the slipping back, I've learned, is not evidence of failure. It's evidence of learning. You can only see the pattern when you're outside it. When you're inside it, you're in it, and the work is to build enough awareness that the outside perspective arrives faster. What helped me most was specificity. Not "I want to do better," but the concrete, exact question, what will I do differently in this specific type of situation, the next time it appears? What is the exact moment where the old behavior begins? And what is the alternative action I can take at that exact moment? Those questions, practiced, tested, refined, are what actual change is made of. Not resolution. Not insight alone. Specific, practiced, repeated alternative actions. I'm not done. I'm not fixed. I don't think that's how this works. But I'm different than I was. In specific, measurable, real ways. And the story I've just told you is part of why. The telling matters. It keeps it from becoming something I store away and don't examine. It makes it real, again, every time I say it. And real is where the change lives. I think often about the version of myself that was inside the experience, not this one, the one that can look back and see it clearly, but the one who was in the middle of it, navigating with partial information and real fear and the limited emotional resources of someone who hadn't yet learned what was happening. That version of me was doing the best she could with what she had. That's not a get-out-of-accountability-free card. But it is a necessary part of the honest accounting, because self-understanding can't be built on self-punishment alone. At some point the punishment has to give way to comprehension. And comprehension, real comprehension, requires some compassion for the person you were before you knew what you know now. I didn't have the tools I have now. I built them since. Slowly, imperfectly, with help from therapists and honest conversations and the specific, uncomfortable practice of sitting with things I'd rather not sit with. The goal is not to arrive at a version of myself that doesn't make mistakes. That version doesn't exist. The goal is to make a different kind of mistake each time. Not the same one, wearing a new costume. A genuinely new one, smaller, or at least different in its shape, because I'm bringing more awareness to the territory than I had the last time. Progress doesn't feel the way we imagine it will when we're inside the difficult chapter. It doesn't feel like transformation. It feels like the gap between impulse and action getting slightly longer. Like the moment of recognition arriving slightly earlier. Like the voice that says, "Wait, not yet, is this what you actually want to do here?" getting just a little louder, a little more reliable, a little more present when you need it most. That voice is there. It's always been there. I just had to learn to stay quiet long enough to hear it. And that's the practice, in the end. Staying quiet enough to hear yourself. In all the noise of living, in all the urgency and the wanting and the fear and the pressure, staying quiet enough to hear what you actually know. I'm still learning. But I'm listening now.